go through, or rather flush them out as it would be on a normal school calendar. What do you see the government or yourself at the county level, at the or as a representative of the people of Nambale, what do you see yourself doing to help schools cope with that situation?
I'm not, thank you very much indeed. I don't know how the ministry wants to handle this. One option, of course, is to delay everybody, including starters, by a year, so that next year's classes would be repetition for those who are in school, in the sense that they're back in the same class that they had started the previous year.
Yes.
But they should not double classes. In Nambale, and I think there are a number of certain regions in the country which have high fertility rates, including Busia County and Nambale constituency also.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are many others around the country,
for sure,
in which the classroom enrollments are already very high. Classes that should take, say, 50 to be generous, are 100. And there's physically not enough room to split them in different classes. And if you do, there are no teachers to sort of hop from one classroom to another. And so if you double the actual student enrollment, meaning that you allow entry into the first grade as if things were normal, and then those who are first graders that had gone home now have also to come back to the first grade, that doubling would run through the entire education system until they graduate.
Yes.
That would cause, I think, irreparable damage in terms of poor student-teacher matching. So I really would hope that we'll take the tough route of saying we're not going to allow new class ones. You keep them where they are, perhaps in preschool, so that the school can then run with the normal calendar as we go forward.
Yes.
But that's just taking the worst of scenarios. It's not as if we are starting with the best case scenario.
Right.
And of course, the colleges. We have had in many parts of the country a glut of teacher trainees, students who graduated as teachers and can't get employed. In Nambale, we are running behind maybe 7 or 8 years, as in seeking now graduates for 2012 or 2013, thereabouts, which is a big pain and a big difficulty for parents who have taken their children through all of that, sold land, sold cattle, borrowed, and so on, and they can't get back to jobs. So some delay there may just be a reprieve as it is. But the other exams, class 8 and Form 4 exams,
yes.
we have a very exam-driven system. That's a huge tragedy. I would hope that they will find a way in which that syllabi for those two school systems levels can be accommodated for them to sit an exam sometime, let's say, early 2021. But if not, again, that'll be a huge disaster. There are many parents who have calculated tightly to say to class 8, and then they're now ready to take them to Form 1. Now, if you delay them again by another year, you're putting pressure on the parents, and you're putting pressure on the parents in respect of younger children. So yes, these are really, really difficult times.
Right. Now let's shift gears to a story related to this, and we are having on page 4 of the Daily Nation, we are told mental health cases a source of growing worry. The reason why I'm focusing on this, albeit it being a rather smaller story, is that there was an incident yesterday whereby a mother took with her 3 children to the banks of River Nzoia and tossed them in that before throwing herself in. Basically, it's considered suicide, though investigations are still ongoing. The bodies have not been found out. And this is an increasing worry because we had last week a similar story that happened whereby a woman actually killed 4 of her children, 3 girls and 1 boy. What do you make of these developing stories, and what do you see happening or to make things better for people in terms of healthcare and them accessing mental health assistance?
I think that this is extremely tragic, both cases, and I'm sure there are very many cases. We have had cases of gender-based violence and all kinds of things that have spiked to a point even a lay person who listens to the news or reads the papers or goes on social media is now fully aware of. I think it's a crisis level. There are many dimensions to this. One is that I think that we as a country have not given sufficient emphasis to mental health issues. If you look, if you get into the vernaculars, for a person who requires mental health assessment or support, They are called mad people, and you know, madmen or mad women, and with the connotation of like the scum of the society, when in fact it is just a progression. As they say, we are all mad to some degree. It's just the degree to which we are that perhaps matters. This is now, in a dramatic way, is getting a headline coverage. But I think something that has lived with us with great neglect. There isn't much expertise on issues, on services, whether clinical or social or psychological, that can be provided to our people. Perhaps in school systems, in the upper school system, we might be able to get that kind of help, but I think it's rare. But the people parents in the village don't have that kind of support of any kind. Children do not have that kind of support at all. They can be mobilized as part of a specific case here and there, but we don't have anything to support the school system. Recently, I followed some of the discussions on mental health issues. They are focusing, for example, on the, other than Mathare Mental Hospital, on the absence of services around the country and even the adequacy of that hospital in dealing with these cases. But there are also other, this need for services that are not clinical, that are not in hospitals or in the public health sector. They are more in the social side. People who are able to sit down with a client, and the client will be an ordinary parent in the village. They just don't have that kind of access. So indeed, this is for me is shining the spotlight on a matter that we have lived with quietly, on issues that we have relegated to the background.
Absolutely, and hopefully things will take a turn for the better. The biggest story across board, obviously, is that lost year. It's education-wise, but we're going to circle around it because that's going to be the main subject of our next discussion. But another big story that made headlines yesterday was Sabasaba Day and the uproar after activists were actually arrested. And this is being, an accusatory finger is being pointed at the states, and it's being accused of curtailing the freedom of to protest, as calls for the release of the protesters grow louder. But at the same time, we have the arresting officers and the security personnel saying that this was being done because said protesters were going against the COVID-19 measures that have been put in place to ensure that people actually protect themselves from COVID-19. So I'm wondering, on your from your perspective, where do we draw the line between calling for certain justices in society and, of course, personal responsibility when it comes to things like COVID-19?
I think it's very unfortunate occurrences, what we witnessed in the media, on TV and social media, the way that the police are handling protesters. If indeed, in fact, accusing protesters of not being COVID-19 compliant, they themselves are entering into wrestling matches with the protesters, and they are barely protected. The police who are accusing the other side of not being protected. I think it is in the culture of brutal enforcement, of crude handling of protesters. I think we need much more training. I mean, we could have dealt with the human rights issues, for example, in respect of arrests. But if there are gentle arrests, you get to court, you get charged, you get out perhaps on free bail, and you yourself will sit back and say, I have made my point. And that would be it. But as it is, I think the police come out as if now they are going to war, and it's very, very unfortunate. As I said, they're not even exemplifying that out there in the contacts that you yourself needs to be protected. They should be aware of that. They're exposing themselves as well. I think the Sabasaba recall is a valid thing. It is part of our political history, and I think we should learn to handle these kinds of things. Those protesters weren't violent. They had loud messages, but they weren't violent, and they needn't have been handled that way.
Manhandled, and we saw, this happening at the beginning of the curfew enforcement, whereby we are having people brutalized as the police try to enforce that measure that's put in place to curb the spread of COVID-19. So clearly, perhaps do you think there should be another way of enforcing these rules and measures that does not involve the police directly? What else? What would be an alternative to it? Because it always seems to be ending in a brutal way.
I think there are many options, but one of those that I think is within reach and is now will be within the understanding of the ordinary person, including those who would go out and express exercise their rights under the Constitution to protest, which would be civic education. While the police are not handling protests, perhaps they should be out there, if they understand it themselves,
yes,
explaining the law. And normally there are marshals in mass protests who would help people, let's say, on the highways, on the roads, how to keep themselves safe from traffic, for example, who would ensure that the extremists among them don't stop and do damage. They carry on the cause.
Right.
That's civic education. And that cannot be done under the gun or under the threat. That if you did, yes, you're required, as it is now, essentially just to notify the police, not to seek a permit as it used to be in the old days, but then to say, yes, of course you can go ahead and protest, but it must be peaceful. You must have marshals, perhaps with jackets identifying them, marshals on the road if they're going public places, so that they stay the cause, and the ability for those protest groups to point out even to the police those among them that are acting illegally, that are acting in extreme ways. You always get people like that, people who are looking for a kick. They'll go in and they're going to cause damage. So I think all around, civic education, clarify the rights under the law and the limitations under the law. It can't be because the state is afraid that we are in a fragile socio-economic political setting, so any protest will highlight that, and therefore we must stamp it out. That's what degenerates into all these problems.
Right, and now far from that, on page 5 of this Daily Nation this morning, we are told about reckless behavior that could result in the overwhelming infection spike. And pictured there quite aptly is a border rider and his client right there. The two, with these two without face masks, was spotted in Ngong Road in Nairobi in June. Some people have taken the ministry guidelines quite lightly. And we speak of border riders. It's no secret that they're quite popular in Western Kenya. So I foresee similar situations unfolding. And as people travel right now in great numbers to the rural areas, what do you make of this, and how do you foresee this unfolding? Do you think people are going to be taking this seriously, or is this going to be a similar situation all through?
I think it's extremely sad that at a time like this, that picture is extremely informative, but it's a very common scene in small towns and in village markets and in rural areas generally. But I ask myself, how is it that a country like Rwanda, there's no motorcyclist or bicyclist, at least in the cities, going around without a mask, including their client? They don't carry more than one. And we have succeeded to flaunt it in this country. The borders are carrying 2-3 persons on their motorbikes, with none of them, including the cyclist himself, wearing any headgear. And they do that, they're passing in front of the police. The police are just standing, it doesn't bother them. When everybody's waiting at traffic, at the roundabouts, for example, waiting for the green light, they are just able to get through, and they don't seem to care about that. The police themselves have ignored it. However, where it is enforced, I can give you examples in Mombasa and in other parts there may be, I'm sure it's true in other parts of the country, where if you are not wearing a mask and you are arrested, you have to part with about 3,000 shillings. In fact, some they demand as much as 10 before you can go. So you find people wearing masks out of fear for the extortion fee they would have to pay, rather than out of the expectation that this improves their health.
Yes.
I want to suggest the following. I think that the police must get more serious with civilized enforcement of mask wearing. It should not be as it has happened in, I think it was in Kisii over the last weekend. It's alleged that somebody was shot, finally was shot dead. And his initial problem was that, I think it was that he didn't have a mask on. Now, come on, that's getting it too far. But that means also that the police were probably, in their mind, engaging something completely different than just the wearing of a mask. So we need to get in a civilized way, consistent enforcement of these requirements. Now it's COVID. But generally, it should be issues of the simple law and order.
Right.
If you quote Kigali just for the last time, this time, and you are driving and you reach a red line, it never stops. Whether it's a bicyclist, whether it's a motorcyclist, and of course motorists and pedestrians are waiting also for their green light to cross.
For sure.
You come to Kenya and you say it's free for all. It's doable.
Yeah.
It's not something that I think anybody is paying attention to.
Yes, and still on transport, of course, we, from the proclamation that was made by the president, we are having people traveling all over the country now freely. It's a slow start for transport sector. We have been told about that. But obviously, there's the element of possible infections as people move to other parts of the country, yes, taking it from the hotspots such as Mombasa and Nairobi. And here we have a story on page 4 of the Standard whereby you're told you must treat your own. Kagwe tells counties a surge in cases is expected. Do you think we're prepared for a surge, and what's your overview of that possibility, and just in a short comment?
We are not prepared for a surge. We aren't even really prepared for where we are now. I don't know, I've not looked at the data. I don't know what the scientists and statisticians are projecting. Right. Our curve will look like over time, but we are still rising. And I know that we are still at the low base of the curve because the total number of mass testings are very limited. In fact, we have very little mass testing. We're doing mostly targeted testing in areas. But anyway, it's still quite limited. It's not until we shall reach a significant number, like 1 in 7, 1 in 8 persons in the population, that maybe we'll begin to predict the curve in a way that is accurate. I think that people should not have to move. People may have wanted to move because they had been locked in. Yeah. There's the urge to get out. I go to the village every weekend, to my constituency every weekend, and families say casually, they say, for those who are in Nairobi, please don't come back. Right. You are going to be. Now, this is the first time, I think, in my own history, personal history, where you're coming from the city, you are more of a problem than the villager themselves. They say stay there. So I think this is going to cause massive problems around the country and put a big strain on the facilities that are non-existent in many places. Yes. And I think just going to lead to a lot of hardship and perhaps huge losses of life because of this opening without sufficient civic education. I think it'll be something like, yes, you are not able to move before, but you don't have to move. Now, of course, we know, on the other side, just as I conclude, that if you're in the city and you're not working, and you have been a day wage laborer or just a low-income earner, and you have a family, it's extremely difficult and it's unmanageable. It's one way in which households are taking their families back to their rural homes, if they do have them, where you can now begin to survive on the basics. You can grow your own food. You do not have to pay rent, and so on and so forth. And maybe the breadwinner in the family will return to Nairobi or will stay in Nairobi. So it's one person to worry about. It's a coping mechanism. Yes. And it's also because we have not been able to provide, let's say, household income support as other countries that can do so have done. And therefore, for people just to avoid starvation, they are going to move out to the rural areas to ease off. Absolutely. That has huge consequences. Absolutely.
And as we talk of those trends between rural and urban migration, the fact when it comes to health, most people have more faith in the health systems in the city as opposed to those in rural areas. So given that being the situation, even without a pandemic and COVID-19, this is going to be quite the problem. Not all counties have been able to come up to the 300-bed capacity, and we're talking about a lack of PPEs. Even education for medics is lacking in terms of what they should do in order to protect themselves so that they are not even getting infections and passing it on to their families. So this seems to be, the projection given all those facts is quite bleak. Don't you agree?
Yes, absolutely agree. Agree entirely. I think that first of all, the level of preparedness as it is, even just 300 beds in each county is a big challenge. And indeed, yes, people have more faith in health facilities in cities because partly rather, generally speaking, the quality of services, despite the challenges that are mentioned from time to time, is much higher than rural ones. And rural ones, you go long distances to get to health facilities. You can get there and find the most basic medications are missing. The treatment of patients is not always that good. That's why there's a high tendency to seek out mission hospitals because they tend to treat people a bit nicer, but that now few and far apart. It's indeed a humanitarian disaster.
Right. Now we're going to take a short break. Thank you very much, Honorable Bunyasi, for your sentiments on press review. We're going to discuss education and how COVID-19 and the measures put in place are affecting us and having a ripple effect all the way to next year. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll have more for you right here on Morning Express.